The man behind the counter didn't even look up when Warrant Officer Celestine Okafor-Ndidi walked through the sliding doors of the Rideau Centre branch of Northern Trust Bank. That was the first sign. She had driven 40 minutes through Ottawa traffic on a Tuesday afternoon, still wearing her uniform, the Canadian Forces dress uniform she'd put on that morning for a memorial ceremony at CFB Petawawa, the kind of ceremony where names get read aloud and nobody speaks too loud, and the air feels heavier than it should. She'd been asked to represent her unit. She'd spoken. She'd stood at attention while a folded flag was placed into the hands of a woman who would never stop shaking. And then she'd driven to the bank, because life doesn't pause. Even on days like that, she needed to open a joint account for herself and her mother, who had recently moved from Lagos to Ottawa to be closer to her daughter and the 2 grandchildren she hadn't seen grow up properly. Simple errand, 40 minutes at most. The man at the front desk, his nameplate read B. Hallien, advisor, finally looked up when she reached the counter. He took in her uniform. He took in her face. And something shifted behind his eyes that was not quite professional. "Help you?" he said. Not "good afternoon," not "welcome." Just those 2 flat words, like she'd interrupted something important. "I'd like to open a joint account," Celestine said. "I called ahead. I have an appointment at 2:30 with someone named Gauthier." Holloway glanced at his screen with the enthusiasm of a man checking whether it might rain later. "Gauthier's with a client." "I have an appointment. He's with a client." Celestine looked at the clock on the wall behind him. It was 2:28. "I'll wait," she said. He gestured vaguely at a row of chairs near the window. She sat, she waited. She watched 3 other people, all of them white, none of them in any kind of uniform, get called to desks within minutes of arriving. One of them hadn't even signed in at the front. At 2:51, she went back to the counter. "Is Mr. Gauthier still with a client?" Holloway didn't look away from his screen. "These things take time. I've been waiting 23 minutes. I understand that. I had a scheduled appointment." "Ma'am," I said, "I understand." "Warrant Officer," she said quietly. "The correct form of address is Warrant Officer Okafor-Ndidi." That got his attention. He looked at her then, really looked, and what she saw in his face wasn't embarrassment. It was something closer to irritation, like she'd made an unreasonable request, like she'd asked him to do something inconvenient. "Right," he said. "I'll let him know you're still here." He did not pick up the phone. She went back to her chair. At 3:07, a man in his 30s appeared from a back office, jacket slightly rumpled, looking harried. This was Gauthier. He walked past her, actually walked past her, scanning the waiting area, and then turned back to Holloway with a puzzled expression. She heard Holloway say something. She heard Gauthier say, "That's her?" in a voice that wasn't quite quiet enough. He came over. He did not apologize for the wait. He said, "You're here about an account?" "Joint account," she said. "For myself and my mother. I have all the documentation." "Right." He looked at her folder of documents, SIN cards, proof of address, military ID, her mother's landed immigrant papers, everything organized in a clear folder she'd prepared the night before. He picked up her military ID and held it for a moment too long. "This is a Forces ID?" "Yes. And your mother, is she here?" "She wasn't able to come in today. I have her notarized consent form and a certified copy of her ID, which I confirmed on the phone last week was sufficient." Gauthier set down the military ID. He clasped his hands on the desk. "Right. The thing is, for a joint account, we typically prefer both account holders to be present. I was told on the phone that wasn't required if I brought the notarized documentation." "Who told you that?" "Someone in your appointments line. I don't have her name." "Well," he exhaled, "I can't verify what you were told, and I'd hate for you to have come all this way. I've already come all this way. And have the application not be processed correctly. It might be better to reschedule when your mother can be present." Celestine looked at him for a long moment. She was very still. People who knew her, colleagues at the base, her CO, her mother, would have recognized that stillness. It was not passivity. It was the particular quiet of a person deciding which tools to use. "I'd like to speak to the branch manager," she said. Gauthier smiled the smile of someone who has heard that sentence before and was not afraid of it. "Miss Nkemdirim is actually in a meeting right now. I'll wait. It could be quite a while. I've already demonstrated I can wait." He excused himself. He went to the back. She sat in his office and looked at the framed print on the wall. One of those motivational things about goals and potential. and thought about the woman at the memorial that morning who would go home to a house that was missing someone permanent. She thought about her mother, who had spent 40 years building a life in Lagos, and then sold most of it to move to a country where the winter lasted too long, and the people were polite in a way that could mean anything. She thought about the documentation in her folder, which was complete, which she knew was complete, which had been confirmed as complete over the phone by someone whose name she hadn't thought to write down. 20 minutes passed, then the door opened, and a woman walked in, mid-50s, natural grey locks, the kind of bearing that comes from years of walking into rooms that weren't built for you, and deciding not to care. This was Ms. Nkemdirim, and she looked at Celestine with genuine attention. "Warrant Officer Okafor-Ndidi," she said. "I apologize for the wait. I'm told there was some confusion about your documentation." "There was no confusion on my end," Celestine said evenly. "I have everything that was requested. What I've been given are reasons why that documentation might not be sufficient, without any specific policy cited to support that." Nkemdirim sat down. She opened the folder. She went through it page by page. The room was quiet. "This is complete," she said. "I know." Nkemdirim looked up. "Who did you speak with initially?" "Mr. Gauthier at the desk." "Before that, the gentleman at the front, Holloway." Something moved across Nkemdirim's face. It wasn't surprise. That was the thing. It wasn't surprise at all. "Give me a moment," she said. She left. Celestine heard, from somewhere in the building, the low sound of a conversation that was not quite a conversation. One voice talking, one voice receiving. It went on for several minutes. When Nkemdirim returned, her expression was composed but deliberate. "We're going to open your account today," she said. "I'm going to process it myself, and I want to give you a direct line for any future banking needs. No front desk, no appointments, just my office." "I appreciate that," Celestine said. "Can I ask, what happened?" Nkemdirim held her gaze. "What happened is being addressed internally. It wasn't everything, but it was honest. The account was opened in 40 minutes. Nkemdirim walked her to the door herself. As they stood at the entrance, Celestine paused. "My mother is 71, she said. "She's been in this country 8 months. This was her first experience with a Canadian bank. I want you to know that." Nkemdirim nodded slowly. "I understand. I don't think you can fully understand," Celestine said. Not unkindly, just clearly. "But I believe you're trying, and that's something." She walked out into the cold grey Ottawa afternoon. The parking garage was 3 blocks down. She passed a Tim Hortons, a construction site, 2 women pushing strollers, a teenager with headphones around his neck, arguing with his phone. The city moved the way cities move, indifferent and continuous. She didn't feel triumphant. She rarely did. That was the part that the movies always missed. The part where it's over, and you're just tired, and there's no music, and you still have to find parking. But that's not where the story ends. 2 weeks later, Celestine received a letter, not from the bank, from the office of the Regional Director of Customer Experience for Northern Trust Financial Group, a woman named Eugenia Chow, who was, it turned out, a former officer herself, CAF retired, who had built a second career in financial services compliance. The letter was formal but direct. It outlined the findings of an internal review that had been launched following Celestine's visit. It detailed specific failures in service protocol. It indicated that B. Holloway had been placed on administrative review pending the outcome of a formal HR process, that Gauthier had received a documented formal warning, that the branch's client intake procedures were being audited by an external firm. It also said this, that a new training module on respectful service to military personnel and newcomers to Canada was being developed, and that Celestine's case, anonymized but otherwise intact, would be used as a foundational example. She read the letter twice. She put it on the kitchen table. Her mother, who was sitting across from her, asked what it said. Celestine told her. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in Igbo, something that translated roughly as, "They thought you were alone. They didn't see who was standing behind you." She meant the uniform, the rank, the 30 years of service that had made Celestine what she was. But Celestine thought about it differently. She thought about the woman at the memorial. She thought about every person who'd ever sat in that waiting room and been made to feel like a problem instead of a client. She thought about her mother, who was 71 and new to this country, and shouldn't have to depend on her daughter's military rank to be treated with basic decency. She thought, I am not the story. I'm just the one who had the tools to make it visible. Because that's the quiet truth inside this kind of moment. What happened in that bank branch didn't happen because Celestine walked in. It happened because of what was already there, an attitude, a habit, a willingness to look at someone and decide, before a single word is exchanged, how much respect they deserve. The rank didn't create the injustice. It just made it impossible to ignore. B. Holloway didn't lose his position because he mistreated a warrant officer. He lost it because the warrant officer had the means to ensure that what he'd done couldn't quietly disappear. That's the part that should trouble all of us. Because most people who sit in that waiting room don't have Eugenia Chow's letter. They don't have the folder, the documentation, the rank, the training that tells you exactly which words to use and which questions to ask and which silences to hold. They just have themselves. Which should be enough and too often isn't. Celestine knows this. She thinks about it. She doesn't know what to do with it entirely. She's not a crusader. She's a warrant officer who needed to open a bank account and was made to fight for the right to do something ordinary. But she filed the complaint. She gave the statement. She responded to Eugenia Chow's follow-up with a full written account, names and timestamps included, because she understood something that a lot of people in her position understand and fewer say aloud. Your story has weight, not because of who you are, but because you told it carefully and you told it true. The account is open now. Her mother uses it to send money to her sister in Enugu and to pay for her ESL classes on Tuesday mornings. Small things, the things a life is actually made of, and somewhere in a training module that will be shown to bank staff across 3 provinces, there is a scenario, no names, no rank mentioned, about a customer who was made to wait, who was questioned without cause, who asked for what she was entitled to and was told, in various ways, to come back later. The scenario ends with a question. What would you have done differently from the start? It's the right question. It's just that it should never have needed to be asked. If this story made you feel something, share it. Not because the algorithms need feeding, but because someone in your life probably has a version of this story too. A waiting room, a dismissal, a moment where they were looked past before they could even speak. They deserve to know they're not alone, and that sometimes, not always, but sometimes the system can be made to correct itself. The question is whether we're willing to push it.